Welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. Each week we talk to people active in business and the economy about the big issues driving growth in the north of England. We're sponsored by Virtue Motors, one of the UK's largest motor retailers. Check out its website at virtuemotors.com. I'm Graham Robb, owner of Recognition PR. We help scores of businesses promote their products and services, and some are featured on this podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. In the studio today with Simon Ruck, Managing Director at MAC International, and down the line we have Andrew Haley, Chartered Financial Planner at Active Chartered Financial Planners, and Hannah Slaughter, who's Senior Economist at the Resolution Foundation. Later my colleague Harry will be talking to Tom Dower, who's the Principal of the South Durham University Technical College. Welcome everyone. Before we get to the guests in our discussion point, let's talk to Andrew. This is our first update on finance from a chartered financial planner. Andrew, what are the key data points? If this was the weather forecast, you'd look at what the temperature was and what the wind direction was. What are the key data points in the economy at the moment?
Yes, thank you, Graham. So I think to start with, we'll touch on the main point that's been a big story with the cost of living crisis, etc., for the last year or so. Inflation impacting households and businesses. That key headline rate of CPI came in at 4% in December, just creeping up slightly from the 3.9 that it was in November. Not a huge increase, of course, and we are still on track. The Bank of England is forecasting that it will be getting to its target of 2% within the next year or two. So key tie-in with that, of course, is the interest rates. That's their tool to tackle the inflation issue. And they were held at 5.25%. 6-3 was the vote in favour of holding. We should note that two of those members were in favour of moving the rate upwards slightly to 5.5. But we held at 5.25, and I think people that are remortgaging in the next year will probably be quite pleased to hear that news. Generally elsewhere, the labour market continues to be strong. Unemployment has ticked up slightly, particularly in the northeast, which I know is something you'll probably speak about in detail today. Average house prices aren't moving along too much. They're up slightly on the year when you look at the index data, but no major movements on house prices as of yet. We do have about 1.5 million people due to remortgage in the next year. So we'll see with the Bank of England's moves on interest rates, how that impacts. And from an investment market perspective, the FTSE opened around the 7,600 mark today. Been a fairly quiet start for the FTSE to this year. US markets really still driving things there. The tech AI story still dominates.
Well, that's great. And I noticed that crude oil has stabilised. It hasn't. Everyone was worried it would spike with the Red Sea, but it's stabilised around $78, $80 a barrel.
Yeah, I mean, geopolitical tensions, generally the Red Sea impact. Thankfully, it's not been too much of an impact on the UK as things stand. Oil prices are down from the 100 or so per barrel that they were back in 2022 type years. Relatively stable. If you look at the forecasts, JP Morgan, some of the big names, they're not expecting major moves on the oil front, possibly dropping slightly in 2025, but clearly, there's some factors that are out of our control there.
Andrew, that's great. It's good to get a look at the data all in one spot, and maybe we'll have you coming back and doing this on a more frequent basis on the podcast. Thank you, Andrew Haley. Thank you very much. Now, let's introduce our next guest. Hannah Slaughter is the Senior Economist at the Resolution Foundation. Good to have you on, Hannah. And can I ask you, first of all, to tell us, hang on, we got something covering the screen there. Right, we got you now. For our viewers, first of all, tell us what the Resolution Foundation is. I know, but not everyone who listens and watches the podcast will.
Yeah, of course. So we are an independent think tank based in London, but covering the whole of the UK. And our focus is on improving living standards for people on low to middle incomes. And we do that across a lot of different areas, including housing, incomes, taxes and benefits, but I personally cover the labour market.
Now, I was very interested listening to Andrew Haley's update of the data, and he was talking about the Bank of England and the interest rate decision. I attended in the northeast of England, in Newcastle, a business lunch with the member of the shadow, one of the two members of the MPC, who put voted to put up interest rates. Obviously, they didn't have the majority. And he was saying that actually the economy is still running quite hot. And he was particularly looking at wage levels accelerating beyond inflation. So I know you look at the way in which working families can deal with the financial pressures of everyday life, but this was an economist utterly convinced that these families, along with legions of others, were in a better position, and the facts bore that out, and they could have a justification for an increase in interest rates. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult job for the Bank of England to gauge, because on the one hand, obviously, from people's living standards, it's good news if wages are rising above inflation, in that people can kind of buy more with their pay packets in real terms. But what the Bank of England's often worried about is if wages are rising too fast, and then businesses have to put up prices in order to pay those wages, then inflation rises for everyone, and then people aren't any better off because the inflation then just kind of rises to overtake wages. So it's a really kind of fine balance, and something that's been kind of it's kind of been difficult to kind of
yes,
take the right side of the data. What I would say is that workers are doing better in real terms than they were a year ago, but we should see that in the context of the cost of living crisis as a whole. When we look over the full kind of 2-3 years that inflation's been high for, wages are still kind of lower in real terms than they were then, and wages are also starting to slow when we look at kind of more recent data, so say over the last 3 months rather than over the last year. So it looks like kind of wages are starting to cool off, hopefully in a way that means that the Bank of England won't have to raise rates to stem inflation further. But it's obviously right that they are kind of keeping a close eye on what's going on there, so that they can kind of make the right judgments.
And it is true, of course, he was the minority report of it, but it was a three-way split on the Bank of England this month, because there was one of the economists that said that a rate cut was right at this stage. The one interesting takeaway I had, because my business is in PR and so on, he was pointing out that the service sector is seeing continued wage growth, and obviously that was sticky as far as the Bank of England was concerned, and wages account for the larger proportion of costs within the service sector than other sectors.
Yeah, and I think it's always true that services inflation is always kind of it changes more slowly than goods inflation, just because goods are often more volatile, and as you say, kind of with wages being a big part of the story at the moment, it's kind of natural that it will take kind of longer for kind of slowing wages to feed through into inflation, and particularly into services inflation. So it's perhaps unsurprising that services inflation is taking longer to come down, as long as it is kind of moving in the right direction, or we think it's going to kind of feed through eventually. That obviously the Bank of England, when they're doing forecasts, that they're thinking about kind of what's coming down the path from the changes to other prices that we've seen so far. So now
the data that affects the people who you speak for is lower income and middle income families. That of course that all people in politics are concerned about as well, and make the vast proportion of customers for the businesses that listen to this podcast. These families are facing cost increases in other areas. Food is still going up, albeit by not as much, and consumer products are still going up, albeit by not as much. Fortunately, energy prices have stabilized. But there are things that are hitting these families, like all council tax. I don't think I could see a council in the country that isn't putting up council tax by more than inflation. Mobile telephones. I mean, the phone providers were given by the regulator permission to increase their bills last year by inflation plus 3.9%. So all of these have a tiny effect, but added together quite a significant effect on household income. Is that something you find bears scrutiny?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that we saw a lot, especially during the period when prices were rising really quickly, is that because of the kind of the fact that different types of household buy different kinds of things. Some families were getting hit harder by inflation than others. So the key example was that when food prices were rising really quickly, it was lower income households who were really bearing the brunt of that, partly because they spend more proportionally of their budget on essentials like food, and partly because, that if they're already buying the cheapest brands, they can't, switch to, Sainsbury's Basics instead of, normal Sainsbury's. So it's always been kind of quite unequal. And it's clearly still, even though overall price growth is slowing, first of all, as you say, there are products where that's not the case and prices are rising really quite quickly. But also we shouldn't forget that even if prices are growing less quickly, they're still growing, and also we're still living with the higher price levels that have kind of come from this long period of rising prices. So even though the cost of living crisis might be entering a bit of a new phase, it's certainly not over yet.
Now, I don't know what the foundation's view is, or you as an economist's view is, on getting money into working families' pockets. The government chose at the beginning of this year to cut the working family tax in the form of cutting national insurance, because people who pay income tax and don't work don't pay national insurance. So by cutting national insurance, it was going to working families. And it was quite a reasonably significant cut, wasn't it? And the government is hinting at more of the same in the budget next month. What's your view on that as a mechanism of putting money into those families?
Yeah, I think when we think about the changes to the tax system the ones that we saw in the budget, in the autumn statement in November, and the ones that we might see if the government chooses to do more of those at the next budget in March. So I guess it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because yes, they're cutting the rates and the proportion of their income, the rate of tax that people pay on their income. But what they're also doing over the longer term is keeping the thresholds at which you start to pay tax frozen. So often, or kind of normally, I suppose, there's, the rates, the threshold at which you start to pay tax would kind of gradually go up with inflation, so that, the poorest workers don't pay any income tax, or you don't pay income tax on the kind of a certain chunk of your earnings. And normally that would kind of go up with inflation, so it stays roughly the same in real terms. But that's not happening. So actually, people on relatively lower earnings are being gradually brought into scope of having to pay tax, and then into higher rates. So when you look kind of at those effects combined, it's a bit more of a mixed picture. And so it's kind of it's it will have an impact for some people, but for some people they'll be kind of brought into the paying tax in the first place when they might not have been otherwise, or kind of paying higher rates because of those threshold reasons.
Okay. Now, one piece of economic news which all people in employer land, people who pay wage bills, will be interested in, is that there was a record number, 2.8 million people who are long-term sick. And, there may be employers and others who feel that it is too easy for some to claim long-term sick, or it's too difficult to move from long-term sick into employment. And something needs to be done to address that figure and liberate some of these people to work in the workforce. What is your view on that? And do you have any ideas whether it is possible to tackle this?
Yeah, it's definitely a big issue. It's something that's been on policymakers' minds, especially since kind of the COVID pandemic started to kind of, as we moved out of the lockdown phases, it emerged that this kind of rise in economic inactivity. So people who are not working, but they're also not looking for work, and especially people who are, their reason for that is that they've got a long-term health condition, that's been rising. I mean, it was rising before the pandemic, but it kind of has continued to rise since and become a big policy focus. And it's certainly a concern, the fact that, these people are not able to participate in the labour market, not able to kind of, gain a higher income through that than they'd be able to get out of work. And it is certainly a problem. I think in terms of supporting people, part of it is just about the health of the population. I mean, there's kind of evidence, aside from the economic data, there's evidence that there's rising rates of ill health in the population as a whole, and tackling that is is really crucial. And I mean, for example, in the last budget, the government put more money into mental health services, which has been one kind of big area where we've seen kind of a rise in ill health. So that's really welcome and kind of tackling the root issue. And then it's in terms of kind of supporting those people back into work, because I mean, it's really, it's important for those people's living standards. It's also important for businesses who, want a pool of jobs of workers to fill their jobs, who want the skills to be able to fill those jobs. But in order to do that, it's quite difficult to kind of bring people back into work after they've been out of the workforce for a long time. It is, it's possible. And again, one of the things that the government did in the last budget was put more money into kind of support to help people with health conditions to get back into work.
Coaches and so on, and maybe a more assertive screening of people who are on the benefits so that they can be helped. Automatically, one might think that they're being screened to chase them off benefit, but nevertheless, there are some jobs that you can do if you have certain conditions.
Yeah, there are. And I mean, there's good reason for not having a benefit system that, says, classify someone as just, you can't work, you're too sick to work. So, some kind of, revision of that assessment is welcome. I mean, I think the key is to make sure it is about, as you say, supporting people into work and into work that's like suitable for them. And I think that's, that's a key area where we think policy should focus is helping people get into jobs that are right for them, but also helping to keep people in work in the first place so that they don't leave. And that might be things around kind of providing flexible work, whether it is remote work, if it's, people can work from home, if it's that they need more flexible hours to attend medical appointments, providing that kind of thing, or, giving people the right to return to work if they have to take an extended period of sickness absence to make sure that they can, come back to their job rather than having to leave the workforce entirely. I think that's where we think policy can have the most impact.
Hannah, thank you for that. Stay there. Simon, you're an employer. You live, you're business based in northeast England. We'll get into that in a minute. What do you have to say on what Hannah is saying about some of this long-term sick? And do you have recruitment issues yourself?
Well, yes, Graham, we do. With the point of the sickness and absence, what I've found over the years is we tend to grow with certain people in the business, members of staff, and you get to know them, you get to know their problems, you get to know what they want, what they don't want, good things and bad things. And I think over the years we've developed a culture where we can actually talk to people. So if a problem does come along, which it invariably will and does often, there's a solution. We like to think we can retain people, very good long-term staff, but every challenge that you can imagine will come to a small company, medium company owner. Sickness is not rife, but anything can happen, and it will. And the way you deal with that is very important. We're looking for a level of staff and quality of employees that can really work and do justice for us, which we've got. But it isn't a simple thing. It requires a lot of skills. HR alone, it's a complex subject. An HR manager may or may not do it and help. The whole management team is involved on a day-to-day basis.
It does sometimes feel, as a small business myself, that you are a part of the social services in many ways.
You certainly are.
You have to be more than just focused on your job.
And that's experience, and that comes with time. And I think that's a good thing. And sometimes it's a difficult thing to explain to people, but you do get involved in people's problems. There's a point where you can't, and the structure comes into place. But I'm very much in support of the increase in the national minimum wage, and we track above that. And I think most companies will be doing that. So it's a complex subject, and it's an interesting subject. Do enjoy it.
Let's talk about your business for a little bit. Hannah, stay with us. I'll probably come to you to round up at the end. Mac International, it makes things. This is fantastic news. We want things being made in Britain. Tell everyone what you make.
Okay, well, thanks, Graham. We make a range of pressure washers, have done for many years, and we're lucky enough to have a brilliant network of distributors across the country who retail the products that we distribute to them. So our factory in Darlington will produce a range of hot and cold specialist pressure washers that will be sold into all areas of industry: petrochemical, pharmaceutical, transport, agriculture. So we tend to get a good barometer of what's going on in the UK. the dealers will have their fingers in numerous pies. And from our point of view, the economies, you mentioned the economy you thought was hot. I think it probably is. I think things are actually going very well.
Well, that's great. And by the way, these pressure washers, if you think about a pressure washer you use on your car,
No, it's not like that.
That is the same relationship as your car to an articulated truck.
It is.
So
We're talking about a big pressure washer.
Big pressure washer.
Industrial pressure washers, which most people have got in business.
Now, these industrial pressure washers have used diesel engines
They have.
to power them.
They have.
And you've managed to find a niche of convincing your customers to change to different
Absolutely.
fuel.
That's quite right. Net zero is everything to us. We're in an industry which regrettably has burnt quite a lot of CO2, emitted CO2 as a process of what it does. As a responsible manufacturer and supplier, we're finding various different routes, and one of them is our creation of a new range of products which utilises 100% electricity to heat the water, with huge benefits, not only in performance and the quality of the product, but also the obvious fact is we're not emitting any CO2 from that product. It's an industry problem, it's not a Mac problem, and we're working towards offering our customers choice, because we're not saying that the old system is bad or it's wrong. We just need to find a route forward if people want to take that.
Now, you are still an SME, but nevertheless, you're a reasonably good SME. You've got millions and millions of turnover, not hundreds of millions, but millions and millions. But here's the interesting thing. Your growth in these net zero products, you're growing hundreds of percent. It's, turnover in these things is doubling every year.
I think if it was day one and it was day two with those figures, we sold a few machines, but it isn't. It's 5 years in, and the product is really getting some traction in the in industry generally. The sell of these products is very important. You're asking people to spend a little bit more money, but the payback is quick. And the benefits of no fuel, no diesel, no gas oil is enormous. And it's taken hold, particularly in the Northeast, which is a very important area for us. As we know in the Northeast, that net zero is a major issue in Tees Valley. And we're talking to people who want to hear this, as opposed to talking to people who just would rather use the old traditional methods. And it's made a huge difference in the development of the product. We've been able to try and test it in all sorts of fantastic companies in the Northeast successfully. And it's developed a product now which is nationally bought, and we're looking to internationally sell in the next year or two.
That's fantastic. It could be an exporter, and that's what we need in Britain, because the balance of trade is, in the end, quite a significant thing in our economy. And let's just ask you about forthcoming thoughts on the wider economic picture. Go back to where we started. What do you think about the level of interest rates? Are you happy where they are? Would you, if you were on the member of the MPC, would you vote to cut them up?
Probably not. It's a double-edged sword, and they're obviously split on that. I would think that the interest rates would, if anything, I'd like to see them a touch down. We're finding that companies that we deal with, suppliers, they're under pressure, and a lot of it would be down to old borrowing. Which is painful. But as an importer, obviously, we want the strong pound. So slight interest rate rise would always help us with that.
Now, you're a business owner. I'm a business owner.
Yep.
Hannah works with the Resolution Foundation, which would look after employees.
Yep.
If tax cuts were going to happen in the budget, they might be focused on national insurance. And we just had Liz Truss back in the picture on television, and it reminds us that they were looking at top rate tax cuts last year, or 2 years ago. Where do you think tax cuts should be levied?
Well, I think that the one-off super tax is the answer to a lot of things if you believe that story, which a lot of people don't. And I think it can be an easy answer to political questions about how things are going to be funded, tax the super rich. I think the taxes at the moment, as we see right here, seem to work. Politically, it's going to change, possibly, we don't know. If it does, then we'll be faced with a different set of problems.
What about, this is the last topic to introduce today, because we're running over time.
Okay.
I was looking at a Labour spokesman talking about taxing unearned income at the same level as earned income. Now, that would mean if you were paying an income tax rate and you were a business owner of 45% plus national insurance of 2% on top, so 47%, or if you're in Scotland a bit more, your capital gains tax would be significant if you sold a business asset. Some people I know who own businesses regard tax, that's a disincentive to invest.
Not at this stage for us. I think, we're pretty young in our development of the company. And all we can do is play the hand that's in front of us at the moment. But we're very aware of future tax implications. And it does seem a little bit unfair that you work to do that and then you're taxed with a reward if you can sell an asset. But I think I think it's okay at the moment.
Hannah, what's your view on this? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? This is the tax on what's described as unearned income.
Yeah.
But if Simon buys the building his building's in, that's income that his business has earned and it's probably been taxed with corporation tax in the first place as well. What's your view on this particular attack, which could be coming down the line on capital gains?
Well, I can't say I'm a tax expert in particular, but in terms of the kind of broader sentiment, I think if you're going to tax income from work, then there's clearly a case for taxing other forms of income in a similar way. Obviously, that there's kind of questions about looking at the whole of the tax system and if there are other taxes that people are paying on those forms of income, making sure that they're not kind of then suddenly having to pay above the odds in terms of tax. Do
you believe in the principle that a lower tax is a higher incentive, or do you not?
I mean, probably to a certain point. Again, it's not my area of expertise. What I would say is, in terms of kind of stimulating growth, where we think is worth kind of putting the money is in investing in infrastructure in the public sector and kind of getting businesses to invest in the private sector in things that we need. And I think in terms of if we kind of take the government's kind of if okay, you want to cut taxes, where if we were going to do that, where would we go? I think one of our examples would be around stamp duty, so that and the reason for that being that there's that reducing stamp duty would help people be more mobile around the country and to help kind of use the labour force more effectively and kind of help people kind of help kind of break down some of those geographical boundaries. But that's kind of if we were going to cut taxes, what would we do? But I'm not saying that's kind of
Hannah. That's very helpful. That's asked and answered. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Simon. And now, to conclude the programme today, over to my colleague Harry. I always mention him at the end of the programme because he produces it. Now, he's been out and about with our cameras and he spoke with Tom Dower, Principal at South Durham University Technical College.
Thanks, Graham. I'm here at South Durham University Technical College in Newton Aycliffe. It's National Apprenticeship Week and I spoke with Tom Dower, the principal of the UTC.
Apprenticeships are fantastic because you're training, you're learning, you're in the world of work, so you're being paid, and you're also getting qualifications as well. And especially if you look at degree apprenticeships and higher apprenticeships, the level of experience that a young person will have is absolutely brilliant for them. If you think about what employers are looking for, they're looking for people who are ready to come into the workplace and engage in a really positive way in work. That work readiness only happens if you have young people who've had experiences of academic, technical in this case, and workplace education. So UTCs provide that opportunity for them to build their confidence through dealing with employers, through a range of different projects and a range of experiences. Our students show visitors around, they meet with members of parliament, they have really good interactions with adults, which means that they're confident and ready when they go into the workplace. So employers can get involved in a number of different ways, but at the UTC, they can come and work with our students on projects, on visits, and they can take placements. So for example, the new T-levels, which are an amazing qualification, which the government has introduced, require 45 days of work experience for a young person. Now, after that 45 days, they are absolutely ready for work. But it's up to employers to volunteer themselves in order to be able to furnish that experience.
Thank you, Harry, for that report. And now if you want to join us as a guest on the Northern Business Podcast, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks to producer Harry Sinclair and also technical operator Robin Campbell. Join us next time on the Northern Business Podcast. Don't miss an episode. Do like, rate and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.